In the early 1960s, Japan stood at the edge of an economic miracle. Cities were growing taller, streets busier, and a new hunger for modern entertainment was sweeping across the nation. In the heart of Nara, a city known for its ancient temples and serene deer parks, something very different began to rise from the ground, an ambitious dream made of steel, paint, and music. It was called Nara Dreamland. From the moment its gates opened in 1961, it was a dazzling spectacle. Towering above the entrance, a pastel-colored castle reached into the sky, promising a world where reality would melt away. It was a place where children's laughter mixed with the smell of cotton candy, and the sound of carousel music drifted through the warm summer air. But behind that cheerful facade, there was something strangely familiar. The castle, the main street, even the layout of the park, it all looked almost identical to a place thousands of miles away, Disneyland in California. Built after Japanese developers failed to secure a licensing deal with Disney, Nara Dreamland was, in many ways, an imitation. And yet, for the people who entered, it was no less magical. Families would travel from distant prefectures just to spend a day here. Roller coasters roared, children chased each other through the fantasy streets, and at night, the park glowed like a jewel against the darkness. Still, even in its earliest days, there were whispers. Staff spoke of strange moments during night shifts, lights flickering when no one was near the controls, music boxes starting by themselves after closing hours. The management dismissed these as harmless quirks of a new park. But some employees, working alone after midnight, claimed they would hear the faint echo of footsteps on the empty pavement. Or a child's giggle coming from somewhere deep within the darkened rides. It was as if, from the very moment the gates first swung open, something unseen had slipped in along with the crowds, and it would never leave. Through the 1970s and 1980s, Nara Dreamland stood as one of Japan's most beloved escapes from reality. On weekends, the main road leading to the gates became a slow-moving river of buses and family cars. From early morning until nightfall, the air was alive with excitement. Children clutched balloons shaped like smiling animals, parents carried paper bags brimming with souvenirs, and the scent of sweet cotton candy mixed with the sharper aroma of oil from the sizzling snack stands. The park's rides were legends in their own right. The Aska roller coaster, a towering wooden behemoth, groaned and rattled as it hurled passengers through steep drops and sharp turns. Beneath its towering structure, shadows danced across the ground as if the ride itself were alive. The carousel, with its mirrored panels and hand-painted cherubs, spun endlessly, the music echoing across the park in a loop that could become hypnotic if you listened too long. At night, the parades transformed the park into a river of light, floats glowing in electric colors, dancers moving in perfect sync, and fireworks painting the night sky. It was, by all appearances, a golden age. The photographs from those years show nothing but joy, smiling faces, packed streets, and rides filled to capacity. But photographs don't capture everything. Behind the scenes, the cracks had already begun to form. Ride operators whispered about accidents, small enough to keep out of the newspapers, but disturbing all the same. A child who slipped from a Ferris wheel seat but was quickly carried away by staff before the crowd could notice. A man who boarded the haunted mansion alone one quiet afternoon and never came out on the other side, only to be found hours later, wandering near the park's outer fence, muttering incoherently, unable to explain where he'd been. And then there were the rumors. The kind that spread in hushed voices among staff during late-night maintenance shifts. Some claimed to see human-like shadows darting between rides long after the gates had closed. Security guards patrolling the grounds after midnight reported hearing faint laughter, high-pitched, childlike, carried on the wind from the empty carousel. Others swore that the music from the parade would sometimes start playing by itself in the dead of night, echoing through the park's deserted streets. One guard, new to the job, quit after a single shift. He claimed he saw a little girl standing alone at the front gates just before dawn. She was wearing an old-fashioned dress, holding a balloon that drifted slowly upward into the dark sky. The guard swore he turned his head for a moment, and when he looked back, she was gone. Still, none of these whispers reached the public. The park's cheerful exterior was a perfect mask, and the crowds kept coming. The rides kept spinning. And the shadows kept watching. By the turn of the millennium, the magic of Nara Dreamland had begun to fade. What had once been a shining beacon of joy now stood in the growing shadow of its rivals. In 2001, Tokyo Disneyland and Universal Studios Japan opened their gates, sleek, modern, and officially licensed. The difference was impossible to ignore. While those parks thrived with cutting-edge attractions and international marketing, Dreamland began to feel dated. The change was slow at first. Weekdays grew quieter, the lines for rides shorter. Vendors stood behind counters with nothing to do, their eyes drifting toward the rust beginning to creep along the edges of the rides. The bright pastel paint began to dull, peeling under years of sun and rain. Then the weekends started to thin out too. Whole sections of the parking lot stood empty, weeds pushing through the cracks in the pavement. The once glorious parades were reduced to a fraction of their size. Floats that had once glimmered under hundreds of lights now sputtered with only a few bulbs still working. The park's music, once crisp and cheerful, began to sound warped and faint, as if the speakers themselves were tired of playing. Guests noticed more than just neglect, they noticed the feeling. Families spoke of an uneasy atmosphere, of the sense that something was watching from the corners of the park. Parents took their children home early, explaining it away as the rides just aren't as fun anymore. But those who worked there knew better. The strange occurrences, once rare whispers, became harder to ignore. Rides malfunctioned in ways no engineer could explain. The carousel would spin by itself during the night, its mirrors reflecting nothing but darkness. Entire sections of the park's lighting would flicker on and off in patterns, almost like Morse code. And the laughter, that strange, distant laughter, seemed to grow louder when the crowds grew smaller. On August 31, 2006, the end finally came. The staff gathered for the park's last day of operation. Some were relieved, others devastated. But all felt the weight of finality in the air. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, the last ride of the night began, a slow, creaking run of the Aska roller coaster. Only a handful of guests remained to ride it. The wooden track groaned as if in pain, and the sound carried far across the nearly empty park. When the gates finally shut that night, they closed not just on an era of childhood dreams, but on something far older. And far stranger. That had always lingered in the shadows. After the gates of Nara Dreamland closed in 2006, the park didn't vanish overnight. It remained there, locked away from the public, yet visible enough to remind everyone that it had once been alive. From the outside, it was as if time had stopped, but inside, time was merciless. Nature moved in quickly. Weeds sprouted through the cracks of the main street. Rust bled down the sides of the roller coasters, turning their once bright steel into jagged, reddish scars. The paint on the pastel castle peeled away in long, curling strips, revealing the dull concrete bones beneath. The water in the log flume rides stagnated into a black, foul-smelling sludge. And yet, in this decay, there was a strange beauty, a beauty that drew in the brave and the foolish. Urban explorers, photographers, and thrill-seekers began to sneak into the abandoned park. By day, they documented the eerie stillness, rows of empty ticket booths, carousels frozen mid-spin, faded signs pointing toward rides that would never run again. But at night, the park became something else entirely. Those who ventured in after dark told unsettling stories. They spoke of hearing music, soft, distant, and tinny, drifting from somewhere deep within the park. Some claimed the lights of the parade floats would flicker to life for a few seconds before shutting off again. There were even photographs showing strange shapes in the shadows, figures that looked like staff in old uniforms. Or children standing perfectly still, staring at the camera from afar. The most infamous rumor was about the castle. Explorers said if you climbed to the very top and stood alone, you could hear footsteps coming up behind you, slow, deliberate steps that stopped the moment you turned around. No one could ever explain the echoing sound of a balloon popping in the dead silence, or the feeling of cold fingers brushing their skin in the humid summer air. By now, Nara Dreamland wasn't just abandoned, it had transformed into a living ghost story. And each new trespasser added another whispered tale to its legend. By 2017, the city of Nara had grown tired of its ghost. Developers and officials agreed, the abandoned park had to go. Its decaying rides and collapsing structures were now more than just an eyesore, they were a liability. When the demolition crews arrived, they found themselves walking through a place that felt frozen in mid-breath. The carousel horses still stared forward with glassy eyes. Souvenir stands still held faded postcards under a thin layer of dust. Even the entrance gates, chained shut for more than a decade, seemed to creak as if resisting the touch of the workers. The first machines roared to life, tearing into the roller coasters and flattening the food stalls. But the workers spoke of strange moments during those long days, tools going missing, safety helmets knocked from their heads by unseen hands, radios picking up faint music even when switched off. One man swore he heard a child laughing from inside the castle rubble. Though when he went to check, he found nothing but shattered concrete and rust. By the time the last wall fell, Nara Dreamland was gone. In its place was a flat, empty stretch of land, featureless, silent, and stripped of all color. But some locals insist that on certain nights, if the wind is right, you can still hear the carousel music echoing faintly, and see the ghostly glow of the old parade lights flickering in the distance. Perhaps the park is gone in body, but not in spirit. If places like this haunt your imagination, if you believe the past is never truly gone, then join us here, on Abandoned Earth. There are more forgotten worlds to uncover, more shadows to walk through, and more stories to tell. Subscribe now, before the next gate closes forever.